And
great. Well, welcome everybody. I do want to go ahead and give the caveat off the beginning that, this is basic to sleep. It's meant for those that kind of rotate through the summer and those that are brand new. And I start from the basics. So basically, this is with the assumption that you experience sleep. You may have heard about it, but not much else. And so we're going to try to build from that framework. So for those of you that are like old hat, have been coming, are well in the sleep field, I'm not checking to see who's logging in and out and things of that nature. But yeah, so this is gonna be a big review. I do have some really cool slides. I'm very enthusiastic about showing everybody. So let me go ahead and get my slides up and running. Would have been a good idea to multitask while doing that intro. Nope. Okay. And I promise I know what I'm doing. Kind of. There we go. All right. Can everybody see that? Need one nod head. All right. I got my nodded head. All right. And so, welcome again. Like I said, we're going to start from really the basics, talking about sleep. Really quickly, I do want to recognize that today is the federal observation of Juneteenth. And I hope that you are each able to celebrate, observe, or educate yourselves in your preferred manner. And I also want to just point out that if this talk is preventing or hindering your ability to do so in any way, well, like I said, I just gave Jennifer permission to record the talk, and I can't imagine a better reason for a person to catch up on the recording later than to properly observe Juneteenth. So feel free to do so, and you can email me follow-up questions about the materials of the talk at any time. I'm happy to cover that. Also, for those of you that are less familiar with the holiday, there's certainly plenty of resources online that you can help educate yourself and learn more about it. But here are a few contemporary threads that could help to jumpstart your education that I went through myself. And then also, I know there are a lot of hospitals are sponsoring observations and educational events. So here's one at the IDMC that's being hosted tomorrow via Zoom. And I'm sure they'd be happy to have attendees from across the HMS system. So if you have the time and are able and willing, hope to see you there. Okay, so now I'll talk to you a little bit more about today's topic, which again is just really the basics of sleep, which is exactly like I said. Like I'm assuming that you've experienced sleep and know about it, and not experience. And the baseline knowledge for this talk is not much beyond that. So I'm going to actually start by defining sleep. Then we'll talk a little bit about sleep across the lifespan and across development. Some really fun slides there. Then I'm going to go over the functions of sleep, the primary functions of sleep as we know them today, although that's always evolving. And then if we have time, I'm going to talk a little bit about the clinical impacts on sleep. To be honest, I don't expect to have the time, but I always like to have extra slides than not have enough. We will probably take up the full hour and a half today. Feel free to ask me questions as we go, though, so just stop me at any point in time. I'm not great at paying attention to raise hands on the Zoom. So feel free just to unmute yourself if I'm kind of barreling on and you have a question. Okay, so to start is, what is sleep? What is it? So it's, to begin with, nearly every, if not every living creature shows some kind of sleep or sleep-wake-like behavior, at least as far as we can observe. I mean, basically all mammals do, insects, even these, single-cell organisms show these periods of activity and quiescence that have been kind of related to sleep and wake states. And so, that really raises the question. A really great quote from the sleep field is, either sleep is of dire of importance, I'm paraphrasing here, sleep is of critical importance, or it's the biggest mistake evolution ever made. And so, that's one of the big things to try to keep in mind here is if sleep wasn't important for something, it probably would have washed out of our evolutionary system a long time ago. So as far as just the most sleep is one of those things that's tough to define without using the term in its own definition. So as far as, what we talk when we talk about sleep and trying to define it, kind of one of the most basic definitions. This is from Mary Carskadden and Bill Dement in their book from the early 2000s, I believe, is that sleep is a reversible behavioral state of perceptual disengagement from and unresponsiveness to the environment. It is also a complex amalgam of physiologic and behavioral processes. So that is as, blandly stated as you can possibly make it. Amalgam being a mixture or blend of physiologic and behavioral processes. And again, I just kind of italicize some of these key words here. So it's reversible, like if you talk about a coma or hibernation, not superly reversible. You're definitely perceptually disengaged, but not completely cut off from and unresponsive to the environment. So there are changes in our ways we interact with the environment, though we're not completely cut off from it in a sleep state. To go on a little bit further, sleep is typically, and this is where you get to like the sometimes but not always category of sleep. Sleep is typically but not always accompanied by postural recumbence, which is the act of leaning, resting, or reclining. So usually, at least in human sleep, we're laying against something. Behavioral quiescence, again, just, not nearly as much activity or movement, barring a disorder. Closed eyes and other indicators commonly associated with sleeping. So here we go. We finally ended with the term sleeping in its own definition. But the big thing, and again, I know a lot of you have previous experience with sleep, but for those of you that are brand new to the field, A, welcome. We love to have you. There's a ton of work to be done. I love it. Yes, let's do it. But B, one of the main takeaways I always, whenever I give a talk about sleep, is that sleep is an active process. So, for a long time, we kind of equated sleep to like turning off your computer for the night, or even putting it in sleep mode where it's just like off and nothing's going on. That is not the case at all. Sleep is a highly active process. And in this first third of the talk here, I'm going to be doing a lot to try to convince you to that. So to begin with, just when we look at the waking brain versus the sleeping brain, the type of activity that's going on, this is just a traditional PET scan of a brain during probably normal wakefulness, just quiet wakefulness. You see a little bit of so this is the front of the image, the frontal lobe region. And you can see the areas that are in red are more activity. The areas in dark purple are less activity. In this case, these are the ventricles, most likely. And then, in the back here, we have the occipital region, which is the region that's important for, doing vision and processing visual information. And what you can just see here is like, this is probably just quiet wakefulness. Somebody's just sitting there with their eyes open, thinking, daydreaming about whatever, or thinking about maybe what's going on in the room at the time. When you go through the different stages of sleep, and I'm going to talk about these stages in just a second for those that aren't familiar. First, there is what it should be better defined as non-REM sleep, what they put on this slide as normal sleep. And you can see there's definitely a quieting of a lot of regions, particularly in this occipital region. So during non-REM sleep, that's where you're certainly not processing nearly as much visual information. And there's a lot of things that have quieted down and are certainly not making as much activity. But there's still activity going on, believe me, and I'll show you guys some more about that in a little bit. But then when we compare it to rapid eye movement sleep or REM sleep, you can see that there are several areas that aren't just active, but are actually more active during this period of sleep than during the wakeful brain. And so I know that there's been some research into this, and basically and we'll talk a little bit about it as far as a potential function of sleep. But if one of the thoughts that sleep is important for reduced energy costs, so that the waking state is just way too energy consuming, and so we sleep in order to not spend as much energy. Well, when you compare how the brain activity between all the different stages of sleep and the wakeful brain, it's saving about as much energy as about one hot dog bun. At least this is what Chuck Seidler always likes to say. Is one hot dog bun. It's not even the full hot dog, you're just getting the bun saved as far as energy costs. So again, just cannot overstate here that the sleeping brain is highly active, and the certain areas that are active are important for things like memory processing and emotional processing. And that's one of the reasons we think that sleep might be important for those types of things. All right. So now we're going to talk a little bit about sleep physiology and architecture. For those, again, that haven't had the experience, polysomnography is typically thought of as kind of the gold standard for measuring sleep. And so it begins with sleep EEG, or the electroencephalogram. So these are measuring the brain waves. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about these. But you put little electrodes on the scalp of a person, and it's enough, you can get enough of a signal and it goes through an amplifier that you can actually see the cortical layer activity going. So it's just the most extreme layer. So one of the great things about EEG is it's very temporally specific, which means that you do something and you see it in real time. Like you ask somebody to think about something or whatever, blink even, and you're seeing it in real time. The bad part about EEG is it's not very good spatially. You're only really getting the top layer of cortical activities. That's one of the problems with it. So you mix it, and again, why it's called polysomnography is that, there's many measurements going on into our measurement of sleep. And so one of the other things that we get is this electrooculogram, or EOG activity, and you put them on opposite sides of your eye, because we've learned since about the 1950s that you have rapid eye movements of your eyes, and so that is where we kind of learned that tracking eye movements is super important for the measurement of sleep. And so that can actually help you distinguish between different sleep states, as I'll show you in a minute. Oh, by the way, this is a picture of Shaq. I'm not sure if you're like, is that Shaq? It is Shaq. So there's a whole video of him getting a sleep study done at Harvard, and to borrow this excellent picture of him. And then the last one is electromyogram, or EMG. And again, that's you just put a couple of electrodes on the chin, and that allows us to measure muscle tone. And there's other things you can add. This is like the basic setup, the basic gold standard setup, where you're at least getting these. You can add things like respiration, heart rate. I mean, the more things you add, certainly the better data you're going to get. Also, it's going to be a little bit more uncomfortable. Like, this is already a pretty intense setup. So those are things you're going to be wanting to consider when you're like putting different things to different your potential patients or participants to different. All right, I mostly did this slide just because I think it looks cool with the animation, but just to run you guys through the different sleep stages that exist. First of all, we're going to be awake, right? So you're brush your teeth, you're getting ready for bed, and you're in an awake state. And then as you drift off to sleep, like you first fall asleep, or even maybe if you get a little bit, this talk starts to drag a little bit, you start to doze off, your head starts to nod. That's when you start going into stage 1 sleep, or what's called N1 sleep. And so, the sleep field likes to also use lots of different shorthands that are not always consistent, but just to help you guys be able to decipher some of these things. N1 is the same thing as stage 1 sleep. Next, and I'm going to define all these in more detail in a minute. Next, you go into stage 2 sleep, or N2 sleep. And then previously we had stages 3 and stages 4 of sleep, which were the deepening and then super deep stages of sleep. It turned out, and maybe we'll see how this works out historically over time, but it turns out that it was really hard to determine the difference between stage 3 sleep. I mean, it's hard enough to determine the difference between any of these stages, really, but between stage 3 and stage 4, it was getting increasingly difficult, and no one was really seeing much of a reason to separate them. So more recently, in the last decade or so, those stages have largely been collapsed, and they're now referred to as slow wave sleep or N3 sleep combined. So we usually do not separate between stage 3 and stage 4 sleep anymore. However, if you're reading some historical papers, you might see that, and that could be the reason why. And then finally, we go into rapid eye movement sleep. One thing that's kind of like, as you're getting into the sleep field, it can be kind of a glass shattering moment. Like, I'm not sure if anybody's a fan of How I Met Your Mother, but they have that entire episode where like somebody tells you something about something new and it kind of shatters the glass in the background, and like your eyes are open. It really gets, once you get into it, sleep physiology is traditionally scored by the human eye. And so what you're doing, so there's it's by definition, since different humans are doing it, it is prone to errors. And I would say probably about a good 80% of a night of sleep is pretty standard. Like, anybody that knows what they're doing is going to be able to get the same thing. But that leaves about 20% of the night where it can be really tough, really close. And what you're doing as a sleep tech or a sleep score, for those of you that haven't done it before, is you're looking at a 30-second snapshot of sleep, and you are deciding which stage fits it best. And so, sleep stages don't just fall on the 30-second epochs. And so, it could be as far as, I can't remember, do I have this? I don't know if it's, I don't know. As far as like how much you're trying to determine, is over 50% of the screen one stage. For some stages, you'll change it over when as little as 20% of the screen is. So you can actually like be getting out a ruler or maybe like a book or a piece of paper to try to determine what is the majority of this of like stage that's going on in front of you. So again, it's just one of the things that you think that is a lot more structured or a lot more standard. It's really not. It's still traditionally scored by human eye. There's a ton of work going into the automation of it, but it's just really difficult because people have different neural signatures, and you'll see a little bit about more about it. I won't get in the weeds too much longer because I could spend the entire time talking about it, but it's very difficult to automate this process, let's put it that way. So when we're looking at things like the EEG, you're going to be, with the waking brain, it just looks like a cacophony of noise. Like it's just messy because you can be thinking about, you're taking in all kinds of different information. All of your senses are taking in information, and all these different regions are just talking all the time to each other. So it's just like this, I think Matt Walker, and he might have borrowed this from somebody else, said that during the waking brain, it's like lowering a mic into the middle of a football stadium before the game starts. And it's like everybody's just talking to each other. There's 1,000 different conversations going on. You're not going to hear everything that's going on. During stage 2 sleep, that's when things start to get a little bit more structured and put together. And you start to see these things called K complexes and spindles. And so those are the things I'll talk a little bit more about in a minute. But those are the defining features of stage 2 sleep. And then in the deeper slow wave sleep, this is when all of the cortical neurons, at least, are firing together. So this would be like during the football game when everybody's doing a cheer together in sync, and they are firing on and off at the same time together. And that's why you get these really, what looks like these really rolling slow waves of sleep. And they definitely easily differentiate stage 4 from the waking brain. But then you get back into REM sleep, and all of a sudden it starts to look striking. I mean, this is even as challenging. This makes it look pretty clear, but this is like the awake alert brain. It's a lot harder to tell the REM sleeping brain from a kind of a quiet wakefulness brain. So that could be one challenging thing. As far as things we're looking at on the EOG, again, looking at the eyes, the big things is that during stage 1 sleep, it can be really tough to differentiate between wake and when somebody's kind of drifting off to sleep in that stage 1 sleep. And so one of the key signs during sleep onset is you start to see these really slow rolling eye movements. And so those could be a really key indicator that somebody's drifting off to sleep. And then stage 2 and non-REM sleep, there's really not much going on as far as the eyes. But then during rapid eye movement sleep, guess what you get? You get these really crazy eye movements that as soon as you see them, you know that you get a couple of easy epochs of scoring because you're going to be in REM sleep. And then also the last thing is this muscle tone, like I said, and during wakefulness, even quiet wakefulness, you're maintaining some level of muscle tone. And then even in that really deep stage of sleep, you still have some level of muscle tone going on that is detectable by your chin. But what's really fascinating is that during REM sleep, there are actually some things in your brain that trigger to completely paralyze you. And that is done intentionally. And there's a disorder that many of you may have heard of called REM behavioral disorder. And what happens is that the brakes get turned off. And that's problematic because the reason that our body does this is because REM sleep is also when we have our most active dreams. And if you do not have the brakes on, if you do not paralyze yourself during sleep, then you might actually act out your dreams. And that can be really problematic and very dangerous as well. So traditionally during REM sleep, you're going to see this wake-like brain activity. They talk about sawtooth waves, but I always find those still pretty hard to see. These crazy eye movements, and then like absolutely no muscle tone, like completely paralyzed. And if you've ever woken up in the morning or after a nap, it used to happen to me almost exclusively when either napping on the couch or when sleeping on a plane, when I wake up sleeping on a plane. It has not happened to me as much recently, If you ever wake up and you experience what's called sleep paralysis, chances are you're waking up out of REM sleep, and it's like your brain has turned on before it turned off. It flipped the switch, as you actually feel like you're still paralyzed during sleep. It's totally normal for the most part. But that being said, like experiencing sleep paralysis on occasion is totally normal. I don't want to like freak people out. It's really easy to do so. There are some new indicators coming out that having, increased frequency of that along with REM behavioral disorder might be a precursor for Alzheimer's. So we're starting to find things in which indicators of sleep are actually indicators of other neuro things going, potentially neurodegenerative diseases. So there's a lot of really interesting, cool research going on in that domain right now. All right, so again, I'm going to go through these a little bit quickly because I've already touched on them to some extent. But just to quickly define these different stages of sleep. First, there's stage 1 sleep. And like I said, this is like the student just kind of beginning to nod off in class. It's the very light stage of sleep. You have a very low arousal threshold. So if I was going to say your name, you would probably respond to it pretty quickly. This is when we tend to have what's called hypnagogic or hypnagogic imagery, or that sensations of falling. If you guys have heard of the Tetris effect or whatever, which was more, at least I guess I'm millennial, within mine was if any of you played Guitar Hero or Rock Band a lot, and you had those falling things in front of your eyes, and then as you drift off to sleep, you start to see those falling things like Tetris blocks. That is part of that hypnagogic or hypnagogic imagery that you might see as you're drifting off to sleep in stage 1 sleep. And actually, I even find that happens with other things. Like if I've been studying for a test or scrolling the internet, even I feel like I'll have those sensations from time to time. The primary EEG signal during stage 1 sleep is alpha activity. I'm going to talk about the activity a little bit more in a minute, so don't worry about that for now if you're not as familiar with EEG signal activity. But then in a normal, healthy young adult, so we're talking about maybe 18 to 30 tops, you're looking at about 2 to 5% of your night of sleep is going to be stage 1 sleep. A vast majority of individual sleep are other stages of sleep. This is really just the transition stage of sleep. All right, now we've hit stage 2 sleep. This is when the student is well past nodding off with decreased response to external stimuli. So with stage 1 sleep, if I was the teacher, I might call your name and you'll probably just even deny that you were asleep. You'll be like, I wasn't asleep. But if we were actually recording your brain signal, we probably would have seen some evidence of it. In stage 2 sleep, you are definitely asleep. You have, it might take a few louder name calls or an eraser throw or something to wake up your student in that state. This is particularly marked by spindles and K complexes, which I briefly mentioned earlier. And spindles are these really intriguing, very curious short bursts of sigma activity around the 11 to 16 hertz range. And again, I'll talk a little bit more about that activity in a minute. But what's really interesting about spindles is they've been associated with a lot of different things. And in particular, they're thought to be possibly involved in learning and memory. So kind of markers of some activity going on of taking things from kind of your short-term memory stores and placing them in your long-term memory stores. So they may be a marker of that. There's also these things called K complexes, which are these really brief, high amplitude, negative, high voltage peaks of about 100 microvolts followed by a slower positive. And again, I have my thoughts, but on EEG, up is negative, down is positive. I feel like somebody just made a mistake one day. I was like, no, that's what I meant. And then like the entire field now has adopted this ridiculous way of doing things. But up is negative, down is positive. So it's this high voltage peak of about 100 microvolts followed by a slower positive complex, and finally like a little negative peak. This is kind of a prime example of a K complex. And there's a lot less known about what K complexes are, what they're doing. As far as how they got even named, it's shrouded in mystery. One of the kind of legends in the sleep field, I guess, is that it has to refer to knock complex, because you can actually elicit these if you have a participant that is asleep and they're all hooked up and they're definitely in stage 2 sleep. You can actually knock on a wall and it will generate a little K complex. And so because of that, one of the things that we think it might be doing is involved in sensory gating, or at least a marker of sensory gating, so that it's kind of indicative that the brain has responded to it, but has deemed it not to be a threatening enough stimuli to wake up. And so the thing is, these also happen a lot without somebody knocking or without noise. Well, there's also internal things. You have an upset stomach, you could be lying somewhat uncomfortably or something like that. So it's possible that it could be involved in kind of gating both internal and external stimuli. But there's a lot of theories going on. There's actually some now that are also markers of lymphatic system activation and things like that. So, but yeah, so big mystery still. Let's just put it that way. K-complex is still a big mystery. As far as stage 2 sleep as a whole, the primary EEG signal is transitions from alpha to primarily theta activity. And this is actually, though it doesn't get much press, it is the most prevalent stage of sleep in young adults. So about 45 to 55% of a typical night of sleep in a young adult is stage 2. All right, now we've hit slow wave sleep. If this is happening in a classroom, the student is now facing down, snoring, just drooling in her textbook, completely out of it, not responding to anything. As I mentioned earlier, it was previously separated in stage 3 and stage 4 sleep, not so much anymore. This is the deepest stage of sleep and is largely thought to be important for its restorative properties. So if you are absolutely exhausted or if you sleep deprive yourself, what you're going to see is this huge surge in slow wave sleep first. You're going to get that back first, and it's going to be even deeper than it normally is. So we have really, and traditionally, the amount of slow wave sleep you get has some association with kind of those feelings of restoration the next day. As I pointed out earlier, you get these high amplitude, low frequency oscillations or delta waves. And again, that is because all of your brain cells, at least your cortical brain cells, go from their own individual conversations to kind of firing in unison. So there's some activity and some kind of associating between all of those neural cells to fire in a way that they all are doing it similarly. And it's typically about 15 to 25% of the night of sleep in young adults. And then finally, the last stage of sleep we'll talk about is rapid eye movement sleep, or REM sleep. Again, as far as if you're going to just take away a couple of tidbits, one of them being like sleep is an active process. Another one is that REM sleep, for the love of God, is not the deepest stage of sleep. So you always get these like people, these advertisers these days. Obviously, sleep has been turned into a capitalist product. And so you always get these people talking about, oh, it's going to help you get these different stages of sleep. And nothing sets me off more. I know they're actually full of garbage than when I see that this product is going to help you get the deepest REM sleep or whatever like that. Obviously, they don't know what they're talking about. So it is not like that at all. And in fact, the REM brain activity, like I mentioned, is strikingly similar to the waking brain activity. It actually, if you just throw up those two EEGs against each other, it could be really hard, if not impossible to tell. Like if we didn't have the eye movement, and we didn't have, like when they discovered, when Azarinsky and Kleitman discovered REM sleep, that is how they did it. It was the eye movements that did it, not the brain activity itself. Prior to that, they thought that these were just like, periods of arousal, that participants were just awake in their bed. But it was, I can't remember, I think it was Kleitman. He was actually recording his son, I believe his 5-year-old son, and was in the room. So, traditionally sleep labs were like, you let somebody sleep in one room and you're getting the recording done in the other room. And in this case, his son, he was in the same room with his son. So you could see this kid is not awake. That kind of dispelled that myth that it was just, this arousal. And then you could see under the eyelids, these eyes absolutely going nuts. And so that was actually how it was eventually discovered back in the late 1950s, I believe. Again, the primary EEG signal here is low amplitude, high frequency, predominantly beta and theta activity. I have some great slides coming up that's going to talk a little bit about that. But as you can see, we're coming back up and it's starting to overlap with other stages of sleep. And I talked about there's drastic reductions in muscle tone and the appearance of periodic rapid eye movements. And so this is what you're going to see And because you put them on opposite eyes, so usually it's right raised, left lowered is how I always remember where to put them on the face. Because you put them kind of catty corner from each other, the signals actually move in opposite directions. And so you can see that with the one, this, really, it's picking up this really drastic sudden eye movement, and they actually move in different directions because they are placed kind of catty corner to one another. And as I mentioned, it's typically associated with experiencing the most active and vivid dreams. So like there's a lot of stuff going on during REM sleep. It is really interesting to dream researchers in particular. Not to say it's a little bit of a myth that dreaming only occurs during REM sleep. So that's a whole other conversation. But I will quickly dispel it that there are experiences of dreaming technically in all stages of just kind of the intensity, like when you're riding a dragon with your third grade teacher, all of a sudden that is probably a REM sleep dream. And again, we're back down to about 20 to 25% of a night of sleep is REM sleep. And so this is if you again take a normal, well-rested, healthy young adult and you put them in the sleep lab, this is what their sleep is going to end up looking like. And this is called a sleep hypnogram. So if you haven't seen this before, it just shows time across the x-axis here, and then the different stages of sleep over here. And what's really interesting and fascinating is that we evolved to have sleep in a very specific way. So during the first stage of sleep, again, you're just drifting off, you fall asleep, go through that quick period of stage 1 sleep. And really, this is when you should get the most of it throughout the course of the night. It usually isn't that clean, but that is where the primary bout of it is. And then during the first half of the night, that's when we really get front loaded on this slow wave sleep. So the first half of the night, we've evolved to really front load with this deep restorative sleep. And one potential reason for that, again, we can't say for sure, but obviously that we evolved to do this. But one potential reason is that if our sleep were to get cut off, maybe REM sleep is more important for some higher level, like cognitive and socio-emotional processing, but the just deep, functioning level of feeling restored and being able to get to the next day, we need to really jam pack the first half of our night with this slow wave sleep. So that's one prevalent theory for sure. Then the second half of the night becomes super rich with this rapid eye REM sleep. And so that's, you see the first epoch of REM sleep might only be a couple of epochs, might only be a minute and a half, 5 minutes tops. And then during the second half of the night is really when you get substantial 10, 15, 20-minute bouts of REM sleep. And then, as I mentioned before, it's this stage 2 non-REM sleep that is filling in the gaps and ends up being the most prevalent stage of sleep throughout the course of the night. So again, just as another way to visualize this kind of transition from being very slow wave sleep heavy to being very REM heavy, here's another way of looking at that. So it's the same thing, number of hours of sleep across a night. In that first hour of sleep, about 25% of that first hour is going to be this stage 4 sleep. And it's just going to decrease across subsequent hours until you hit about hour 4, and then it's almost wiped out. If you're sleeping normally, you shouldn't be getting much more slow wave sleep beyond hour 4, where just the opposite happens with REM sleep, where in that first hour, you're getting very little, maybe 5% of the night of the sleep in that first hour is REM sleep, but then it quickly shoots up. And by hour 4, you're starting to see closer to 15, 20, 25% of that each subsequent hour is composed of REM sleep. So I think this is just a really cool way of visualizing that. And again, it just highlights that this was not done accidentally. Like, I think that at least, he's getting to philosophical discussions here, but it seems the evolution did this in a way that is very specific and very purposeful. And so if we cut off if we sleep deprive somebody, then that next night of sleep, they might get a little bit more slow wave sleep, and they're going to go right into slow wave sleep. And the slow waves are going to be even bigger. It's more intense slow wave sleep. But they will catch up on that REM sleep too. So then if they have 2 nights in which the REM sleep has kind of been put to the side because of, they're catching up on the slow wave sleep, then the next night of REM sleep is going to be very intense. So it does seem like there's no way around it, and both are really integral parts of a healthy processing brain. That being said, I have like 19 exceptions going through my brain. I'm not going to get into each one because I could spend all day doing that. All right, so based on this, how much sleep do you actually need And one thing that's really important to point out is that sleep amount is normally distributed. So the average person needs about 8 hours of sleep. So the problem is, well, let me say before I get started. So the average person needs 8 hours of sleep. There are people on this planet that exist that honestly only need 4 hours of sleep. There are also people on this planet that exist that actually need 10, 11, 12 hours of sleep. Some of them are elite athletes. LeBron James says he sleeps 10 hours a night. I think he was Pete Sampras or Andre Agassi. We're talking 10, 11, 12 hours of sleep every single night. And so you can see why, if you're going to perform at that peak pinnacle level, you know, sleep could be really important in helping you to optimize and work at your best. So again, chances are a vast majority of people on this call need 8 hours of sleep. The problem is we all think that we need 6 hours of sleep. That's wrong. We may be able to get by. We may be able to baseline function at 6 hours, but that won't be our, we may be able to get by, but we're not going to be optimized. We're not going to be at our optimal level of functioning if we consistently cut off hours of sleep. So it's really important to learn that about yourself. I've learned far too late in life that I'm definitely like a 7.5, 8 hour sleeper type person. But it's really important, and the sooner you can actually figure out what your number is definitely going to help you function at your optimal, and also just be kind of aware that when you short your sleep, the effects that it's going to have on you. So that's going to be something that's, I think, is really important to find out about yourself. Okay. Any quick questions? I'll pause real quick. I know I've just been absolutely nonstop so far. Any quick questions before I continue?
I don't know if it'll be a quick question, but I did have a question, and I'm sorry if you talked about this at an earlier slide. I was just cut out for a few minutes. When you were describing the EEG sort of wave pattern of slow wave sleep and non-REM, you described it as like almost like a stadium where they're in concert, like neurons are firing together. I was wondering, like, what do we know about sort of the neural or molecular basis or correlate of those, of like the period of that firing?
Yeah, great question. I'm about to talk about that in much more detail here coming up, actually. So I'm going to punt it for now, but first of all, like I am a clinical psychologist by training as well. So like it sounds like I know what I'm talking about. So I hang around cognitive psychologists all the time. So like my level is not, my answer is not going to be satisfying, but I'm going to talk a little bit about it. So let me get through these next couple of slides, and I'll signal to you again. And if there's some things I can help clear up, please let me attempt to do so. I do know, I'm trying to remember here, that so it's frontal thalamic in nature, and that the slow waves are actually generated from our frontal regions of the brain. And that is, and beyond that, like I'm not gonna be able to get much more specific. The thalamus is really important for spindle generation. And so one of the studies I'm actually doing is that people with schizophrenia, I just got funded to do this study. People with schizophrenia have poorer, and I say poorer in the sense of smaller slow waves, not as deep slow waves, and they also have deficits in spindle generation. And what's really interesting is there are some medications, but even that can increase both of those things. What's even more interesting is that there's you can do transcranial direct current stimulation, which is you just kind of put like these little electrodes right on the frontal regions of the brain, and you can actually stimulate those slow waves using, and just by firing in that range. And this has been done primarily with healthy controls. And what's really interesting, just to show you the connection between that frontal thalamic coordination, is that the stimulation of those slow waves through that strictly that frontal kind of booster through TDCS actually also increases the spindle count. So there's something going on there that is somehow coordinating those things. When you get really down into the nitty gritty, that's going to get beyond my level of knowledge really quick. There are plenty of people that are really great, and I know Brian Baxter in a couple of weeks is coming and talk about sleep and memory. and ask him. If you want more specifics about that type of stuff, ask him, because this is like right in his wheelhouse for sure. But anyway, let me talk a little bit more about these different brain activity and what's kind of going on during the brain. Underneath, underneath the lid here. Like what's going on under the hood? Thank you. That's what I was looking for. And so we talk about these different wavelengths, and it took me forever to finally start to grasp these. One of the reasons being they're not in alphabetical order, so that always like just killed me. I'm like, how did people come up with this? I assume they just like found one first, and so it's probably like temporal order of discovery, but not helpful when you're trying to remember. So where we start here is these really slow waves. The waves we're talking about during slow wave sleep are called delta waves, and it's this 0.5 to 3 hertz range. And then theta waves is the 4 to 8 hertz range. And then you have alpha waves, which is the 9 to 12 hertz range. And then beta waves, which is the 13 to 30 hertz range. And then usually 30 plus is called gamma. So that's in the even higher activity range. And then you can also have things like in the sigma band activity. When I talk about spindles, that's like the 12 to 16 hertz range, which overlaps a little bit with both of these. It's called the sigma band range. And so again, this is the ordering, and beyond just like memorizing it, I don't have any good tips. But this is what happens when you drift off to sleep. So when you are, first of all, wide awake, you're going to have primarily beta activity. And as you kind of slow down, slow your roll, maybe sit quietly, even rest in bed, if you're still awake, your beta activity is going to slow down into more of this alpha wave band here. And so that's where you have the faster beta waves. If you're really firing on all cylinders, that's that active brain activity. When you start to relax, think about other things, you get into this quiet alpha range. I don't know, I may have misspoke there, but you guys get what I'm saying. Then as you start to drift off to sleep, your alpha activity slowly starts to meld into this theta band activity. And I'll show you guys actually pictures of this on the next slide, but of what the kind of wavelengths look like. It doesn't look strikingly different. Let's put it that way. It's a very, you're not gonna be able to tell from the human eye necessarily just based on looking at these bands alone, but you can kind of get it from context clues, and maybe, again, that's where the eye movement and the muscle movement come in handy. All right, then you hit stage 2 sleep, and stage 2 is all definite theta band activity. So this is when you get to this, on this thing called true sleep. You're not having any more alpha make it onto the screen. You have this theta waves that are predominant on the screen. And then again, you've got those spindles and K complexes. So as soon as you see a spindle, or as soon as you say a K complex show up on the screen, you're marking that epoch as stage 2 sleep. And then you drift off to stage 3 or 4, aka slow wave sleep, and that's when you get down to this really, really deep, slow delta waves of sleep. You're harder to awaken from, and you're having that synchronized brain activity. And then when you come back to REM sleep, and this is one of the reasons that the hypnogram is designed like this, like you're going down and then you're coming back up into REM sleep, that's when you're back at beta level activity. Like your brain is back to firing at the same rate that it did during like active, wide awake, alert wakefulness. Which is a really interesting way to do it. So you can see this is hard to memorize. Like this takes time and getting a little bit more comfortable with the different bands to like really get the transition of different things. Here's another way of looking at it. Yeah. And it shows it just kind of, here's just a small slice of what it kind of looks like visually. Each band looks like visually as you go from beta activity down to alpha band activity. And then you see it's like this really denser and darker compared to this fully alert. And then you get this mixture of, so like what you really see when you do the sleep scoring is it's like all of a sudden these lines start to spread out a little bit. And instead of just having these like really dense scribbles, you get like these little peaks, and you can start to tell there that you're going into stage 1 and into stage 2 sleep. Again, as soon as you see a spindle or K complex, you know you're in stage 2. And then you get this mixture that's stage 3, and so you get this really synchronized activity in stage 4 sleep. And then you're back for REM sleep. I mean, you can just tell how similar that looks, kind of these earlier stages of sleep with REM sleep. So that's just another way of breaking it down, little visuals. Now, what's important, and to your point that you brought up earlier, I think it was Nicole brought up earlier, is that there's a lot of stuff going on under the hood. And these signals don't occur in isolation. It's just which one is dominant that gets displayed by the EEG, okay? So it's the dominant signal shows up on the EEG. And again, this is something I learned just last time. I've been doing sleep research for 12 years now or something. I maybe have 2.5, 3 years of experience with this, where again, we're recording the electrodes on the scalp. So we're just recording the cortical activity, which means that there is a lot of activity going on underneath that cortical activity. And it doesn't mean that these, that there's no other band going on when we're seeing these slow waves. It just means that the only thing the electrodes can pick up and display for our human eyes are the slow waves. I have some slides to describe this a little bit better. I'm doing my best here. So you have so when you have the slow waves, it doesn't mean that there's not theta activity going on underneath, or it doesn't mean that there's not alpha activity going on underneath these delta waves. It just means that that's all, the delta waves are all that we can see at one given time. So we do this thing called spectral analysis. And this is my buddy, Dan Dennis, who I've done a lot of collaboration with. So I know some of you probably have some experience with spectral analysis. Totally fine if you don't. I'm doing my best to learn the best ways of describing it, so bear with me a little bit here. But basically what spectral analysis does is it actually takes that EEG signal, and maybe it looks like it's just theta activity, or maybe it looks like it's just slow wave, and it decomposes the signal so you can actually see how much of each band is actually present at a given time. So just because my stupid human eyes can only see slow wave sleep doesn't mean that there's not theta activity going on underneath, and alpha activity is also going on underneath, and beta activity also going on underneath. And so what it does is that it actually takes the signal and separates it so we know how much of each signal is going on underneath. And there's no better, like he created this visual that just like instantly helped me click, and so hopefully I do it justice by giving you guys a quick breakdown here. But so this is what person 1 and person 2. There's sleep hypnograms look a little different, but for 50, 60 years, these two people would definitely be on the same side of every sleep correlation, every sleep stage correlation you ever did, because they had incredibly, after scoring their sleep episodes, they had incredibly similar wake amounts, stage 1 amounts. You guys, yeah, okay. Stage 2 amounts, slow wave sleep amount, REM amounts, and amounts of movement. These two sleep records, based on the human eye measurements of things, look strikingly similar. Well, then my buddy Dan took it and ran it through spectral analysis and started to decompose things. And so these here are heat maps, basically heat maps of what's going on underneath the hood. And what you can see is that during periods of slow wave sleep, and so these all line up, and so you can see this long band right here corresponds to slow wave sleep here, and then you get some stage 2 and things like of that nature here. And you can see that they both have this band right here. This is about typical spindle activity. This is the really deep right here, delta activity. So one thing you can just see is this person seems to have much more intense, like brighter white is more intense spindle activity, and much more intense slow wave activity in the first part of the night compared to this person. What's even more fascinating, at least to me, is the amount of theta activity going on underneath the hood that we would never know just by looking at it. There is a whole band of theta activity going on in this person that is essentially absent from this person's non-REM state. So you have this entire extra activation activity going on underneath the hood that if we were just scoring based on vision, we would never know about it. And you can kind of see it here. So this purple line here is the sigma activity. So this is, like I mentioned, this person has much more intense spindle activity. And you can just see that based on this relative power of sigma activity in different periods compared to here. And you can't see it as well, but the theta in this person is much higher than over here as well. So there's just a lot more theta activity going on as well. And then we also talked about spindle density and slow oscillation slope. And this person has, like I said, much more intense spindle density, much more intense slow oscillation compared to this person that are really covering, this person's really whole scalp is being covered, not nearly as much over here. So this, all of a sudden, you take these two people that had done a sleep stage correlation up until 2010, maybe. I'm not exactly sure when this started really cropping up, but these two people would have been on the same spot on like every single correlation done up until now. And now that we know we need to decompose the signal, all of a sudden these people might be on complete opposites, depending on what part of the signal we're looking at. It does open the can of worms to a lot more comparisons, a lot of multiple comparisons. So this has, again, there's high inter-individual variability here. So these two people don't look very similar, but there's also high intra-individual stability. So if you look at beta power correlations across 3 nights, I have never seen a correlation so tight in all my years of science. So these are 3, you take somebody, you put them in the lab across 3 different nights of sleep, and you correlate the amount of beta across those nights of sleep, and they are highly, highly correlated. So it's really highly intra-individual stable, which is really fascinating. And so I'm just going to talk really briefly here about some things that we've seen. So this is spectral power differences between healthy controls. So I don't want to get in the weeds on these, we can take all day. So you can just try to kind of pick up, and I'll do a summary at the end here. But these are spectral power differences between healthy controls and PTSD patients. And what we saw is that there's increased beta activity in PTSD patients compared to the healthy controls in both their non-REM and REM sleep. So they're having increases in this beta activity. There's also lower high theta, low alpha activity here in REM sleep in the PTSD group. So they have this a deficit here in this theta alpha range. And then during this non-REM sleep, there's a trend for lower frequency of this lower band of slow oscillations in PTSD during non-REM sleep compared to healthy controls. And so what this is just saying is, okay, this could be a biological marker that we could theoretically use to differentiate between subjects, patients, and healthy controls. There's also, we've seen that there are actual cognitive and emotional outcome measures here. So they found that increased beta during both non-REM sleep and REM sleep during the pre-extinction learning sleep is associated with impaired extinction recall. This is very complicated, but just basically this, having an increased power during non-REM or REM sleep, having increased beta activity impaired extinction recall. This is another one that those that had higher theta activity, which is one of the things I was pointing out earlier, during slow wave sleep, had worse prospective memory performance. And prospective memory is like remembering to buy milk on the way home from the market, or remembering to take your meds at the right time and things of that nature. So if you have this theta activity seeping in, it impaired that memory, specifically during slow wave sleep. And then when we compared trauma exposed controls, so these aren't just healthy controls anymore, but trauma exposed controls to PTSD patients, PTSD patients had reduced beta activity during non-REM and during REM sleep. And this reduced beta activity was associated with greater PCL hyperarousal. So those on the lower end of beta activity had higher measures of hyperarousal on the PCL. So if you're really paying attention there, I know I just threw a lot at you, you might have noticed some incongruent findings. I think it's because we're still all relatively new and fresh and still trying to figure this out. It's pretty novel research. But the main point, again, is that there's underlying activity that really hasn't been looked at or studied in the first 60 plus years of sleep research that seems to have some really clear impact on both clinical and cognitive outcomes. Definitely some more research needs to be done in this area. And I'm just gonna quickly touch on this, is that that's all just electrophysiology, right? I didn't even touch on the neurochemistry of sleep, which varies drastically across sleep stages. So REM sleep in particular is known as a cholinergic stage of sleep, where if you have if these are just like kind of general measures that during active wakefulness, you have quite a bit of acetylcholine, quiet wakefulness, it goes down, slow wave sleep, it nearly shuts off. During REM sleep, all of a sudden you have this huge surge of acetylcholine flooding the brain. And obviously it's going to cause connectivity and activity changes. And then similar for norepinephrine and serotonin, you see kind of just this slow decrease. And then all of a sudden, when acetylcholine is rampant during REM sleep, you're having none of norepinephrine or serotonin essentially. Yet it still hangs around during these other stages of sleep and quiet wakefulness. So really, there's just a lot that needs to be done in this area too. And it's one of the reasons it hasn't been done as much, is it's obviously very hard to study, particularly in humans. So that'd be a really cool and interesting area of future research. So some quick takeaways here. Sleep is an active process that is comprised of several distinct stages. Each stage has its own underlying physiology and neurochemistry, and we're really only beginning to explore how those different things, those different biological markers or physiological markers actually relate to our day-to-day functioning. And then the underlying of nature of sleep has high inter-individual variability, but it's also highly intra-individual stable. So again, our own personal activity patterns seem to be highly related from night to night. And these underlying features seem to have real cognitive and clinical consequences, like I talked about. Okay, so that's where the next thing I would go into is sleep across development. But let me pause there. Again, aside from it being really a frontothalamic connectivity, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to give you much more than that off the top of my head, Nicole. But if anybody else has any other questions about kind of the structure of sleep, what it looks like, things like that, we'll pause quickly to answer questions. This is definitely like the big thing that I'm hoping that I want to get through today and hope you guys all draw from.
I have a quick question for you, Tony, and thank you so much for this presentation, by the way. This is fantastic. Doing a great job. So back to the decomposition of the PSG data, I was wondering, I feel like something that you could maybe guess about what's going on is that there's differences in cortical.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm curious about like how much do you think this is due to like differences in cortical connectivity versus like other things?
That's a phenomenal question. I cannot even hazard a guess, honestly. So like we're definitely seeing it work out. But there's like here's what I'll say. It is very unclear, I think, at this point. But there are some. So like we talked about, we had people that right here, PTSD group had higher beta activity during both non-REM and during REM sleep, like this significant band of higher beta activity. That was actually a replication. So other people found that. It seems to be pretty clear. But another group of people that tend to have high beta activity during these different sleep stages are people that practice mindfulness and meditation a lot. And like it's like they have like a level, they've unlocked a level of brain access that we don't all have, or it doesn't necessarily come naturally. And so those are two. So all of a sudden we're looking at potentially like U-shaped curves when it comes to what's going on, because it could be that in some cases when you have control over it, this higher beta activity is a good thing, and maybe it's indicative that you are really in tune with your internal activity, and that's a benefit to some extent. Whereas for others, maybe it's a marker that they are still being very hypervigilant of their external surroundings with PTSD. And so all of a sudden you have a lot of extra beta activity seeping into these different stages of sleep that you don't necessarily want it compared to healthy controls, and it's causing problems. So that is probably the best example of I don't know. Like, I don't think anybody really knows. There's certainly something going on here that different groups, it can be indicative of different groups. I always get hesitant of declaring biomarker off the bat because I think we've gone a little bit too far down that well too quickly a lot of times. But it does definitely seem to be indicative of something that might be of usefulness down the road, and that we should start paying attention to see how it affects different outcomes. Because really, some of these studies that I showed you are some of the first that are really relaying it to both clinical outcomes and cognitive and emotional performance outcomes. And so, as far as like what is actually going on under the hood, I do not know. I couldn't begin to guess.
Sure. Well, thank you so much. This is really cool.
Yeah, I love it. I love this style. I love Dan. Definitely look him up. He just got was with obstacle out here in Boston, and just got a research position out at York in the UK. So he's gonna, I'm sure, have some more cool stuff coming out. And if you ever have a data set that you're like, I have all this data, I don't know how to do that, he's got to talk to. He also does trainings too for all this stuff. So cannot endorse him enough. Couldn't have done this without him, for sure. Great questions, though, and I wish I did know. It is truly a fascinating question, and I'm sure there's some people that probably give slightly better answers than that. But at this point, it's all spec. I guess I'll go with that. All right, so really quick, I recognize I have 26 minutes, and I want to make this quick, but also somewhat, legible. Somewhat, not go so fast as a blur. So I might pick and choose here. We'll see. I do want to give a quick shout out to Dr. Shear, Dr. Seisler. Some of this information is taken from some of their class slides that I've helped to TF for over the last couple of years. Great opportunity if people have time, and it pays very well compared to like a lot of other teaching gigs. But first things first, for those of you that may be less familiar, there's just this change in sleep that happens across our development. And again, I think this is really indicative of the importance of sleep in early development, just the amount that our brains are requiring when you have this newborn baby, 0 to 3 months, it's getting 14 to 17 hours of sleep. And then, by 3 to 5 years of sleep, it's, closer to 10 to 13. I have a 4-year-old, and I have been, well, let's just say she is a 10-hour sleeper. So what nap or not, if she naps during the day, that's coming out of her nighttime sleep. And she's a 10-hour sleeper. And let's just say I look very envious at my parent friends that have kids, and she's a happy, healthy kid, so I'm not worried about it. But she has some peers who are still sleeping 12, 13 hours of sleep at night, and to have 2 to 3 more hours of free time on your hands every day, I just cannot even imagine. Like, it's just like, oh my gosh, like I just truly cannot imagine. But you can see here, there are still some pretty wide ranges for what's normal. And then if you start to exceed these a little bit, that's when you might start having concern. And I'm definitely not worried about my daughter. She sleeps, she's just an efficient, effective sleeper. And then you get into later in life, and sleep drive seems to go down. And this is where it becomes the interesting question, whereby adults 26 to 64, 7 to 9, older adults 65 plus, 7 to 8. It's the question of, do you need less sleep, or are you capable of less sleep? Like, is there brain deterioration going on that just makes you incapable of getting all of the sleep that your brain might want otherwise? And I think that continues to be an open-ended question, where some people will say you need less sleep, and some people will say you get less sleep. Breaking apart like beyond just hours of sleep, and this is, I'm not even touching on like the spectral stuff that I just talked about. So that's like a whole nother layer that I'm sure people are working on now. When you break it off across stages of sleep, you can see that there's a lot of change in the sleep structure across from 5 to 85. So the amount of stage 1 sleep here in blue, you're getting a little bit more in the beginning and a little bit more at the end. Stage 2 sleep stays remarkably consistent, all things considered. But where you really see the drop, probably the biggest drop in aging, is slow wave sleep. And part of it is kind of just our arbitrary cutoff of like 75 microvolts, I believe, that if you're underneath that cutoff, you're no longer getting what we call slow wave sleep. So that might be one of the reasons this happens, where as a younger brain, it's really easy to get those slow waves. In the older brain, it's just a lot harder to get there. REM sleep stays, again, remarkably stable across a life of sleep, but then you also get a lot more wakefulness seeping in, unfortunately, as we get older. So a lot more fragmentation. Now, one thing about this that's interesting is it starts at 5, and there's still certainly a lot of stuff going on before a kid turns 5. So I found another image here, and let's see, this is about where we left off. I like the other one because it breaks it up into more stages here, but this is at least a comparison of non-REM sleep to REM sleep. And you can see by the age of 5 that the REM sleep seems pretty stable, but not before 5. So here, before 5, when a baby is first born, half of the time they spent sleeping is REM sleep. And so that just is, again, indicative that REM sleep may be really important for brain growth and development during these early years of, or early months and days and months of life. And then by the time you get to 5, things are already beginning to change in kind of what the different sleep stages are important for. And then if you go back even further, I have no idea how they did this. I have absolutely no clue. But apparently the first brain state that you have as a neonate, or no, not even, it's a, what was that, prenatal in the uterus, is REM sleep. So as soon as your brain can do something, it is in REM sleep 100% of the time. And it is only later on that these other stages of sleep and consciousness actually arise out of REM sleep. I have no idea how they measured this, but this is, the current thought here. And again, so REM sleep seems to be really important for brain growth, for brain development. And it might be during these stages here that like literally the first initial connections are being made. And my wife, I should know all this a little bit better because my wife is a NICU nurse, a neonatal intensive care unit nurse. And so she'll be taking care of kids around, that are coming out at this stage of life and things like that. And obviously it can be a real shock to the system. Again, sleep in utero. There we go. Babies in utero sleep about 90% of the time. Oh, is that not going to work? It's okay. It just shows a baby. For time, I probably will cut it out anyway. This is just a little video of a baby sleeping in utero. The distinct sleep stages begin to emerge during the 3rd trimester of sleep, like I said, and markers of REM sleep, so eye movements and things like that, can be detected as early as 24 weeks. All right. Yeah, I'll have it go for a minute. So this is in this new 4D ultrasound at 29 weeks. Oh my goodness. Go ahead. Mute that. There we go. So what you'll see, you might see a little bit of eye movements. We also see some flickers of face movement that are really indicative that this baby is asleep. See a little tweak of makes you wonder what they're dreaming about, as they have literally no experiences that we know of. There's one more mouth. There you go. Really clear mouth movement there. So those are some of the things that they use to determine the babies in utero are asleep at the time. Again, there's a lot of change that happens in healthy development. From 1 week old, you have 2 to 4 bouts of sleep throughout the night and day. And what you could just see here, the really nice graphic here, is that under normal, healthy aging, these sleep periods become more and more condensed. For those of you that have any experience with cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, basically this is what we try to do with kids with insomnia. So you get up to 1-year-old and they're up to 1 long nighttime sleep and a couple of naps. 4 years old, unfortunately, my daughter cut out her nap at like maybe 2.5. Again, not totally abnormal, but she's got this 1 long bout of sleep and then may or may not still nap. That's a no for her. And then by 10 years old, you're getting these like 10 hours of consolidated sleep bouts. Here's another way of visualizing this change over the early days. So this is by day. You can see that in the dark periods here is sleepfulness. The white periods here are wakefulness. And so this is the development essentially of circadian rhythm. So when a baby's first born, they're just all over the sleep. They're just sleeping awake whenever, and this is like the new parent's nightmare every single time. We all know that it's coming, but they're just asleep and awake whenever, whatever suits them. And after a few weeks here, maybe 3 or 4 weeks in, that circadian rhythm has finally kicked in, and you can see getting more sleep in the overnight sleep here, with the 1 to 2 nap periods during the day becoming a lot more consistent. And one thing that I've heard to actually expedite this, at least from Dr. Seisler, for those that are able to breastfeed, are able to pump, and things of that nature. Again, all of, like, that's a privilege in itself to be able to do all that. But if you actually mark your pumped milk for the time of day that it was pumped as like at least AM versus PM, and then give them pumped milk at the correct time, that can actually, one of the best ways that developing newborns get their melatonin signaling is through their mother's breast milk. So if you are able to keep that in a way that promotes sleepiness, like, you know, a time of day and things like that, or does not give them melatonin when they shouldn't, it might actually help expedite the development of the circadian rhythm here. Quickly, for those of you that aren't as into development, like I am not, there's something called Tanner stages, which are basically the stages of puberty. And what we see is rapid changes in sleep that aren't dictated by age, but are very much dictated by Tanner stage. So this is like, you know, you have still Tanner stage 1 at age 10, and by Tanner stage 5 is at age 15. So that is all puberty coming in. So puberty's coming in, hitting hard, and all of a sudden they go from having these really deep prolonged periods of uninterrupted slow wave sleep to having a lot more stuff going on and a lot more full cycles of sleep by the time that they're 15. And they also have changes in their periods and bouts of REM sleep during these earlier stages, during Tanner stage 1 compared to Tanner stage 5. And so you can see like slow wave sleep kind of persists all the way throughout the night for someone at Tanner stage 1, but by Tanner stage 5, they're really on the first half of the night, second half of the night schedule that I showed you guys earlier with young adults. So all of that change, there's a lot of rapid change that happens during these Tanner stages. Let me see. I'm definitely going to skip a couple slides here coming up. And so this is just another really cool visualization of it in Tanner stage 1. And you just see, compared to Tanner stage 5, this is comparing stage 2 sleep in 1 versus 5, stage 4 sleep in 1 versus 5, and REM sleep in 1 versus 5. And you just see how much more, there's no better word than intense. The sleep is just so much more intense at Tanner stage 1 compared to post-pubertal Tanner stage 5. So I think that's just a really cool way of visualizing. There's also the timing of sleep changes. So infants and children are typically larks that like to get up with sun, early bed and early rise times. But then as kids get older, they age into being owls. And all of a sudden adolescents their bedtimes become later and later, especially in male adolescents, where they get later and later and later before reverting back in older age. And then, you know, then all of a sudden you have those 4 p.m. specials for the older folks. And kind of both groups kind of finally meet here around age 50 as preferred time. And this happens so consistently, this change in sleep timing and sleep habits, that it's been proposed as a marker for the end of puberty. So as soon as your bedtime stops pushing back later, we think that might be the actual end marker of puberty here. And then, you know, that's when they move into kind of adulthood from there. And there's some really interesting kind of historical evolutionary accounts for that, why this might be. You might want the younger people that could protect your village able to stay up and willing to stay up later and later when there's a lot more dangers about and things of that nature. So it's really interesting stuff that's like a whole other field that people can get into if they're interested. All right, I'm going to skip to the end of this. I have a few more things that are somewhat interesting, but I really want to take the last 13 minutes to talk about the functions of sleep. So some really quick sleep across development takeaways is that sleep can really be detected from some of the earliest stages of life. Sleep need, physiology, and timing change dramatically across development. And these changes during childhood into adolescence is best linked to Tanner stage. So that really suggests more of a biological genetic in nature and not so much social, just age. It's not just all of a sudden you're 12 and your sleep is going to look like this. It is really being pushed forward by your internal biology and things of that nature. And then what I did get to talk about is there's a lot of pruning that happens And there's an optimal amount of pruning, where if you prune too much, it can lead to negative outcomes. And if you don't prune enough, it can lead to suboptimal outcomes. So if you don't have optimal pruning during childhood and adolescence, that may lead to clinically relevant outcomes. I also talk a little bit about parasomnias. And so there's a lot of parasomnias that occur almost exclusively during childhood, but that's normal. But you should, if it's happening, really presently, that might be a good reason to check for other sleep disorder comorbidities. All right, I'm going to end today talking a little bit, giving a quick summary of some of the functions of sleep. And so I actually have some group participation here. So let me make sure I can see you. All right, I'm going to show you a quick run through here. And I'm going to give you guys a quick, and I can do this. I can do this in the time that we have. I'm confident. I'm going to show you a quick run through. For now, just pay attention. I'm going to go through a couple more slides, and I'm going to quiz you guys on this stuff to make it extra hard. So just pay attention for now. I'm going to show you a list of words. I'm going to quiz you on these words in a couple of seconds. Okay? Just give it a good watch while I take a quick beverage break. All right, so try to keep those in mind. I'm going to plow forward and try to get through as many of these. So there's a lot of functions of sleep. It may not be a surprise. To begin with, sleep keeps you alive. So there is a disorder called fatal familial insomnia, which is a rare genetic degenerative brain disorder that is characterized by an inability to sleep. There are always naysayers that are, it's an inability to sleep until you die. It is also a degenerative brain disorder. So, like, to be fair, like, your brain, there is not a normal healthy brain that you are starving from sleep until death, but it certainly seems to be a big factor in propagating death. So it's progressive insomnia leading to dementia and death, and the survival time is only about 18 months. That being said, no, we have not taken a human being and kept them awake until they've died. Surprisingly, I won't even make the IRB joke there. But certainly, if you could believe animal models for anything, it is definitely a factor in causing death. And some of the more interesting research that's come out lately are what is the cause of death by sleeplessness. And so that is some really interesting, cool research I won't even begin to get into today. But definitely something, if you're interested in, you can look around for. But with rodent sleep deprivation studies, they may survive a couple weeks at best. There have been some instances of long-term prolonged sleeplessness. There was Peter Tripp, who was a radio DJ. He sleep deprived himself as part of a stunt for 260 hours, and he eventually became psychotic and had some major mental health concerns going on. Now, that being said, a person choosing to do that to themselves, there's probably also with some underlying things going on. In a much more controlled way, there was a participant named Randy Gardner who was sleep deprived, otherwise healthy control, that was sleep deprived for 264 hours under research supervision, and he had few lasting long-term effects. So I don't think any of us should say that, like, the brain cannot be resilient to sleep loss, but again, we're talking about optimal healthy functioning, and I'm sure in hour 262, Randy Gardner was not at that. All right, conservation of energy. This is one that comes up from time to time. It's the most passive theory of sleep function. Doesn't have a lot of support these days. Conservation of energy is just saying, like, we sleep so that we're not burning as much energy, and by not burning as much energy, we are able to be able to survive and be more fit for survival and things like that. But that, like we said, like I talked about at the very beginning, REM sleep actually metabolizes more energy at times than the waking brain, and the overall amount of energy saved is relatively minor. So not a very popular theory there. One that's a little bit more popular might be energy allocation, which is essentially that we have evolved to allocate energy to basic functions. So sometimes we want our energy to go to growth, maintenance, reproduction, depending on the situation. And to that exact point, it's situational. So we want to do it in a way that maximizes our reproductive output while meeting our energy constraints in whatever situation we're in. So wakefulness is important for reproduction. As far as I know, in most cases, you need to be awake for reproduction, especially humans. But wake depletes cellular repair, it depletes immune function and neural network reorganization, and that's where sleep comes in. So it just is a matter of a 1-2 punch where we are putting our energy where it suits best, and the sleep is a really critical, important part of that for giving our body the time to do these other things that needs to be done. So where this cycle, since really, and again, life has split off in 1,000 different ways, and evolution has not found a better way to do this yet than to cycle through these sleep-wake periods to optimize the energy utilization at different times for different things, for various different biological processes that would otherwise be competing. So, you know, there's definitely some species that don't have like actually, I think humans are in the minority for doing it in one single 8-hour period of sleep. And yes, there's polyphasic and biphasic sleep theories and things of that nature. It seems the healthiest way right now, at least, is you know, a single phase of sleep at night for humans, barring you could also add a nap in there for sure. But for the most part, you know, other creatures and other species have much more frequently cycle through and have a much higher polyphasic sleep. So, but one way or the other, it seems to be important. Memory and cognition. There's some good theories out there that sleep facilitates learning and memory. In particular, there are some theories, and for a long time, actually, I should say it was almost just standard belief that certain sleep stages are important for different types of learning. I have since updated my slides to bold, italicized may be important for different types of learning. In particular, it was thought that REM sleep was important for procedural and emotional memories, and that slow wave sleep was really important for other forms of declarative memory. The reason I put may out there is because it's so difficult to separate these stages of sleep. Like they run seamlessly into one another. And like I talked about, there's other stuff going on under the hood that may not even be apparent on just like the visual recording of sleep. And so, you know, I think that there's probably, again, maybe one stage of sleep might be more important for certain types of learning than others, but I don't think you could ever say with certainty that any type of learning is mutually exclusive, that it is only one stage of sleep that is driving it, and that's it. We also know that sleep deprivation drastically impairs cognitive function. So that's one of the areas that we see the most substantial drop-offs, and I get to do some of that research. It's a lot of fun. Okay, here, I was just talking about memory. So I'm gonna test your memory real quick. So get ready, you can either turn on your camera and just do a quick hand raise, or you can get out the little like reaction button or hand raise button. So I'm gonna do is I'm gonna show you some words, and I want you guys to like somehow signal to me if you remember these being one of the words or not, whether you wave at the camera or, you know, do a quick automatic like hand raise thing for the different words. So here we go. First word, maybe cotton. Was cotton one of the words? No. Oh man, you guys are even using the nose. You guys are like experienced Zoomers. I love it. Okay, how about medicine? Medicine one word. There we go. We got some yeses, claps, yeses, nods. All right. Medicine was patient. All right, we're back. We're back. I'll wait for that. Okay. I'll wait for some of the things to disappear. Table. Was table one of the words? No. Doctor. Was doctor one of the words? Couple yeses. Some hard no. All right. So we have a bit, like if you look at the screen right now, as everybody sees, it's about 50-50 based on the green and yellow or green and red dots there. I saw some yes, nods, some no's. It wasn't. But if you said it was, do not feel bad, because that's exactly how these lists are created, are by giving the word doctor and saying, what are all the words that are associated from the word doctor? And so by doing that, doctor is the gist of this list. So doctor is what we create are all these veridical memories, which are the actual words, and then the gist of the list, which is these main words. And so you have two different ways of testing memory here. What do people remember from specifically trying to memorize certain words, and what do people remember about the gist of what they were trying to learn? And so this is what we saw after, what was seen after 12 hours of sleep versus wakefulness. So when we talk about the studied words, this is percent relative to 20 minutes. So they did a test at 20 minutes, and then compared to their own memory at 20 minutes, how did their memory perform 12 hours later across red and wakefulness or across green and sleep? So across 12 hours of wakefulness, people forgot about 45% of what they learned. And across 12 hours that included a period of sleep, people only forgot about 30% of what they learned. So right there, some pretty good evidence that if you're studying for a big test, do not do an all-nighter. I wish I had this information as a college student, because I was not a very good college student. So a lot of all-nighters did not do very well in college. And so right here, I mean, and so there's a lot of theories again about what's going on here. But at least for those actual words that you studied and tried to memorize, you're forgetting a lot less when you have a period of sleep involved. Now, where things get really interesting is with those gist words. So the words like doctor, and we also do it with things like window. Sleep is actually one of the gist words. And we test their memory for how many times do they remember the gist words. And so across periods of wakefulness, they forgot about 20% of the gist word. Across a period of sleep, they actually have an increase, a numeric increase. I don't think this differed from zero, but it was still a numeric increase compared to their memory from 20 minutes. And so what the thought that's going on there is that there's different activation going on during sleep. Some of that, we have this reactivation of things that we learned, and Brian will come and talk a lot more about it, I'm sure, during sleep, that actually tunes things up. And so while we, it's debatable about what's going on over here, we're actually pulling away more of the gist of what we learned thanks to sleep, a period of sleep during that time. All right, I know I'm out of time. So I'm just really quickly gonna say a couple of other things that are important, sleep is important for our immune system and inflammation. Really big, really important these days with COVID. Obviously, sleep is a really big thing. Really cool research going on here. This is, I am like hands down, 10 years from now, I think this is going to go down. I don't think, there are people already saying that this is the only purpose of sleep. That's an obvious overstatement in my opinion. But I think this removal of neurotoxins, this enhancement of the lymphatic system, if you haven't looked into this yet, definitely look into it. It's super cool stuff. If you got to go, by the way, feel free to get off. Super cool stuff going on here where our kind of like neural passages open up. There's a lot more cerebral spinal fluid is able to circulate and remove neurotoxins. I mean, we're talking about things that this could be important for things like Alzheimer's disease, neurodegenerative disorders, just aging in general. Some really cool research going on in this domain. Sleep seems to be important for. And then here's just a huge other list of stuff. Like each of these are individual, different avenues of sleep research that sleep has been shown to be important for. So oxidative stress, neural network reorganization, cardiovascular health, mental health, metabolic and endocrine function, carcinogenesis, Alzheimer's diseases, and other neurodegenerative disorders, and absolutely athletic performance. Like I was talking about some of the key athletes in our day showing substantial extra sleep. Okay, so I have extra slides. I'm happy to share these slides with anybody if you found them interesting or would like to take a look at what I wasn't able to get through today. Here are some great references. I even threw in a couple that I'm associated with that were fun to write and I think are pretty informative that you can check out sometime. And I will end with a quote from Nietzsche: "When we were tired, we are attacked by ideas we conquered long ago." So a quote from me, so get some sleep. And that is my daughter right there. And the two of us at her recent dance class. So she's the best lab partner during a pandemic. Okay, I didn't even see that there were chats going on. I am happy to hang out, talk a little longer. I could spend like another half hour even if people are interested or whatever, not to make you feel obligated to stay a half hour. But Jennifer, feel free to stop the recording whenever, and I'm happy to answer questions people might have.